Day 1295 of the war. Russia has effectively attacked Poland's territory. It's not a figure of speech. Much Russian Shahed flew over to Poland immediately. Polish soldiers urged citizens to stay calm and stay at home. It's unclear whether Russian drones flew to Poland by mistake or whether Putin is inspecting NATO for resistance. So we're waiting for details. But to believe that suddenly not one, not two, not even one or two drones flew towards Rzeszów airfield, military supplies are coming to Ukraine, is problematic. But what's for sure, Russia deliberately kills Ukrainians. In the village of Yarova near Kramatorsk, a Russian air bomb killed more than 20 pensioners and Ukrainian employees who came to give them retirement. If they had been killed in American public transport, Trump probably would have. In outrage, the Russian 51st Army is close to being defeated by encirclement near Pokrovsk, according to Ukrainian military analyst Konstantin Mashevets, usually unnoticed by the hat picker. The command of this very army itself pushes its head into the loop, continuing to advance. Despite Ukrainian counterattacks and the threat of cutting off the main forces of the army, however, the command may no longer be active, given the known details of a recent missile strike at command posts in Donetsk. These strikes are even destructive than we thought about yesterday. Russian Z-volunteer Roman Alyakin has burned down due to corruption. A video was posted where he discussed with an enterprise the retreat around the medicine delivered, which would eventually be discharged in much less quantity. A Z-launcher should have received $50 million simultaneously. The negotiation record is recorded with a hidden camera, so this could well be an operational development. Z-authors are in panic, and it's no surprise that many Z-launchers are also ready to strike. In Zaporizhzhia region, there will be even more cases like this. Russian troops are increasingly running around with frontline weapons and broken psychology. More on this in today's fresh update. You can support this channel with your likes, comments, and subscriptions. These actions help promote the video. Subscriptions are especially important for YouTube algorithms. You can also support the channel financially via Patreon. The link is in the description, or by purchasing NVPN, a tool to bypass blocks, allowing you to bypass blocks, watch YouTube at normal speed. Use Twitter, Instagram, call via WhatsApp, Telegram, use Discord, go to blocked sites. In short, not allowing Putin to determine what to watch, listen, and read on the internet. So if you want to do what seems right to you and get information from where you come from, buy NVPN via the link in the description, thereby supporting the release of new videos. And I note that it is not forbidden in Russia yet to buy or use VPNs, and we are moving on to what happened until the past 24 hours. In the night of today, Poland is the first of NATO countries to shoot Russian drones over its territory. At the time of the report, the details and at the same time, the trust information was small, but such a report was published on Twitter of the operational command of the Polish Armed Forces in the morning. Attention! During today's attack, the Russian Federation, which hit objects on the Ukrainian territory, our airspace has repeatedly disrupted objects like drones. The operation continues, the goal of which is to identify and neutralize these objects. At the orders of the operational command of the Russian Armed Forces, weapons were used and services are continuing to look for lost objects. We emphasize it is reported there that the military operation continues, and we urge you to remain at home. The greatest threats are being made by the Podlyatsk, Mazovets, Lublinsk leadership. The operational command of the Russian Armed Forces monitors the current situation, and support forces remain in full readiness for an immediate reaction. So far, it hasn't become clear, and hardly will, whether the Russian drones accidentally flew into Poland due to failure or Putin decided to check NATO for resistance. It's only clear as to whether they've been discussed in Poland to shoot down or not. The Russian drones eventually arrived. The operational command of Air Force Poland stated it would complete the operation in the country's airspace, where Russian drones had previously infiltrated. Preliminary efforts are ongoing to find and install possible sites that have broken through Poland's airspace, so to speak, in a more relevant report. Also, the operational command of Poland's armed forces thanked NATO's Air Force and Dutch Air Force for their help in maintaining security in Poland's airspace. Earlier, I remind you, it was reported that not only Polish fighters but also aircraft from other NATO countries flew over several Shaheds that reached Poland's airspace. The head of the foreign ministry emphasized that feeling of lawlessness for Putin continues to increase. Putin continues to escalate, expand the war, and feels the West on strength. The longer he does not receive response force, the more aggressive he becomes. Weak response now will provoke Russia even more, and then Russian missiles and drones will fly even further into Europe, said Andriy Sabiko. Sabiko added that this situation means it is finally necessary to make a decision allowing the use of air defense capabilities in neighboring countries for UAV intercepts and missiles in Ukrainian airspace, including those approaching NATO borders. As for my opinion, to believe that immediately several strike drones ended up in airspace by chance in airspace from Poland is impossible. We are talking about at least 8 Russian drones, not 1, not 2, not 3. Moreover, judging by the coming data, they flew not in a hurry, but in random places to a military object of the Rzeszów airfield through which military supplies are being delivered to Ukraine. He even stopped his work for several hours. Unfortunately, you do not have to be a prophet to predict that also Warsaw and its other NATO partners will do everything possible to softening the incident. Because frankly, this is a military attack on NATO country, which is not only a draft deal with Poland, but also a full block according to the 5th NATO contract. And it's completely clear that nothing of it will be done. Russia will receive a clear signal for itself that nothing will happen to Kiev Rudas. Aggressor stops where he is stopped. And as in the case of silence of the GPS of civil aviation of European countries being carried out from Kaliningrad, I am not personally waiting for any retaliatory actions. From the West, I will be glad to make a mistake. In fact, this means that the number of Russian attacks against European territory will continue to increase until that point, until there is no further response. In short, tomorrow we'll discuss this in more detail. I think we'll talk about what actually happened, because in reality, a rather serious thing has happened that hasn't during this war. We don't know exactly how the strike will go down the 10 Russian drones, the 80 Russian drones of Poland, so let's not jinx it. In our reality, it's a war between Russia and Ukraine in which the Russian army still doesn't spare any civilians. According to Volodymyr Zelensky and Objective Control, more than 20 civilian lives died in the airstrikes in the village of Yarova near Kramatorsk as soon as their pension was issued. The GSC clarified that 24 people died, another 19 of which were injured among the victims, the pensioners, and the employees of Ukraine's Ukrainian military operator, Ukrposhta. Ukrainian military journalist Yuri Budusov noted that, judging by the video, the strike was aimed at the fascist occupation army and directly commemorated the Soviet soldiers. It was there that the bodies of the killed were lying there. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported naturally on the attack on the live forces and equipment of 3 mechanized brigades of Ukrainian armed forces and the Brigade of National Guard in the areas of the settlement of Yarova and Impal. Do you see any equipment in these photos? It doesn't look the same. The equipment is kept different and the soldiers look different. These are not pensioners who came here for retirement. This is another hypocrisy and bloody lie. The Russian world is liberating the Ukrainian population by throwing bombs, waiting for pensioners, and making pointless killers who should be found and eliminated without any whispers. Russia is a terrorist state, its army is fascist and occupation, and it once again demonstrates this. Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius announced the launch of new initiatives for the purchase of long-range drones together with Ukraine's defense industry for €300 million. This was stated at the beginning of the meeting by former Ramstein on Sunday, September 9 in London, reports the European Truth. Pistorius stated that Germany is expanding Ukraine's capabilities to victimize Russia's military machine in the rear by providing effective defense. He announced a new deep strike initiative that will strengthen purchases for long-range drones together with Ukraine's defense industry. As part of this initiative, we're signing a number of contracts with Ukrainian enterprises for a total of €300 million. These contracts allow for the supply of several thousand long-range drones of various types from Ukrainian production. They are flexible and have options for increasing the number. We are providing all our partners with an opportunity to join, he explained. Pistorius also stated that in addition to the constant supplies of weapons and ammunition systems in Ukraine, Germany is also in the process of supplying 2 full Patriot systems to Ukraine. The first launchers are already sent to Ukraine, the head of the German Ministry of Defense emphasized. He also thanked Norway for agreeing to take half the costs of these 2 Patriot systems. Together with our American allies, we are making a possible quick replacement of the Patriot system, he added. In turn, UK Defence Minister John Healey announced London's plans to fund production of long-range drones in the United Kingdom for Ukraine. This was announced by Healey at the beginning of the Ramstein format meeting on Monday in London, according to European news. Healey noted that the UK will continue to try and force Vladimir Putin to truly get to the negotiating table with allies, so he announced the following plans for support for Kiev. In the next 12 months, the UK will fund 1,000 long-range drones that we will produce in the UK and supply to Ukraine, the British minister said. Germany and the UK, which are currently main donors of military and aid to Ukraine without exaggeration, apparently respected the recent Ukrainian company Deep Strike, which is continuing, and decided to support it significantly. This is good because Zelensky regularly reminds that Ukraine can have even more drones, including long-range ones. It's all about funding. The European Union has already expunged 80% of its supplies to Ukraine of 2 million artillery shells. This was stated by the EU's Supreme Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policies, Kallos, during a European Parliament speech on September 9. We aim to achieve 100% by October, and all this so that Ukraine can protect its citizens and reflect the aggression, Kalos emphasized. Ukraine has already deployed about 80,000 Ukrainian servicemen with combat munitions. Kalos noted that the U.S. is Ukraine's largest training partner and is working on expanding the mission mandate to provide training directly on Ukraine's territory. Within the Parallel Czech initiative, Ukraine has already acquired 1 million large-caliber combat munitions, as reported earlier by Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala, emphasizing the effectiveness of allies' joint efforts. European defense companies are also actively building production facilities. According to European Commission Secretary Andrius Kubilius, by the end of 2025, Europe's ammunition production will increase from 300,000 to 2 million units per year. It has finally come to light that Ukraine will be armed with the latest German Skyranger aircraft systems worth hundreds of millions of euros. The contract was announced by General Director Rheinmetall Armin Popperger in an interview with ZDF Militarny. The supply of an air defense system is expected to begin this year. According to Popperger, the contract will be signed on Wednesday at the DSAEA Defense Exhibition in London. At the moment, no exact changes to the Skyranger system that Ukraine will receive are being deployed. Each of these systems can encircle a square of 4 by 4 kilometers, providing a fully drone-free zone. This means all UAVs will be destroyed, Popperger said. It also comes with an automatic 30-35 mm cannon and optionally an anti-aircraft missile launcher. The cannon can be installed on various self-propelled tanks, including Leopards 1 and Leopards 2, which are already under the arms of Ukraine's defense forces. This is an important point because they often talk about Patriots, but no one will be knocking down Shaheds with these Patriots. And Shaheds are one of Ukraine's main challenge, so countering them is as important as countering missiles. But Ukraine's main defense and main protection is its army. They are the people who, at risk with their lives and giving them their lives, protect their citizens, protect their country, protect their homeland. And their support is probably the act that matters here and now, the act that helps the victim resist the aggressor. And this is the action that I call on you to do, so we continue to collect paratroopers of the 25th Airborne Brigade of the 3rd Battalion. I remind you of their message to you.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Ми десантники 25-ї повітряно-десантної Січеславської бригади 3-го батальйону. Хочемо звернутися до всіх підписників каналу Nacke, які вже нам не раз допомагали, цього разу з проханням збору на комплектуючі для наших потужних розрахунків Mavic 3, Matrix 4.
There are 4 hotels and bombers defending our country in the Pokrovsk direction. There are supplies needed for persistent, unwavering work in the air, skulls, antennas, cables, charge stations, machines, everything else for reconnaissance and enemy destruction. We ask all unwell to reach the fundraising, each donate, repost, and a small step toward victory. Thank you for your attention. Forward to victory. Glory to Ukraine, Jaren Glory. Here's a QR code for Monobank, link in the description. Private, PayPal, USDT, TRC20, so cryptocurrencies. And Monobank too. Thank you to everyone participating. Yesterday, many people participated. Thank you very much. We've closed almost half of this massive fundraising. It would be great if we can complete it in the coming days. This will allow Ukrainian soldiers to buy the necessary supplies, protect their country more effectively, and save their lives. Your support for Ukrainian troops literally saves human lives. Thank you very much for that. Of course, I take part in these fundraisers too. Well, we're moving on. The defense forces receive equipment in less obvious ways than supplies from the West. This report was published by the Office of the Prosecutor General, sorry, Ukraine. According to the initiative of the Special Prosecutor's Office in the field of defense of the Eastern region for the sake of the armed forces of Ukraine, 2 units of corrected combat equipment were delivered Russian tanks of the model T-72 and T-72 BZM. They were found, or 3M. They were found and confiscated by employees of the Special Police of the GUNP in the Kharkov region of the Ministry of Defense and Intelligence of the SBU during the implementation of service tasks in the Bakhmut direction. Both armored vehicles were documented by law enforcement under the procedural leadership of the Prosecutor's Office as part of criminal investigation of Article 1, Article 263 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code, injustice, and they were arrested as medical proof. The cost of combat equipment is 2.3 million. Hryvnias, the advanced equipment will be used by one of the Ukrainian Army's combat brigades. The Special Prosecutor's Office within its official authorities is applying maximum force to increase the defense capabilities of our soldiers. The story is extremely dubious. You understand what happened, right? Prosecutor's office found 2 tanks, someone found 2 tanks. I can't imagine who and where illegally guarded 2 tanks and... Apparently not even the first year. We'll note that tanks in the photo with or without a hint of a brazier are hardly fresh from Russia. I hope Ukrainian journalists will shed light on this story and we'll move on. Although, let's say I know a few stories not public as at the beginning of a full-scale invasion initiated people. Yes, tanks were being purchased in Ukraine, participators who somehow captured them, possibly by acquiring soldiers as trophies or equipment from warehouses before the full-scale war started. So yes, that can happen. Here's a way to replenish the amount of weapons and equipment. Putting Ukrainian drones is very good, but it would be even better to ensure their rational use. So far, Ukrainian drone tactics have been devoted to the Russian Shahed, according to the channel Russian No Context, which writes, this video was published by the Russians a few days ago. It notes how only one mobile fire group, armed with machine guns, in one same place in a single night shoot down at least 6 long-range Ukrainian and 196 UD drones. The drones are not colored in black, which makes it relatively easy to find and spot them with flashlights. Also, they all fly very low one after the other on the same route. Russians simply shoot them down with crossfire, almost not changing their position. At the same time, they show that since 2023 Russian Shaheds have been produced in black color. Some of them are already flying at an altitude of 3-5 kilometers, which makes disembarking them with mobile fire groups impossible. Also, the system of retreat from interceptor drones is being developed. The maneuvering is being advanced, programmably laid out in the route, the cameras are being finalized. The online direction for attacking a target is being added, even on the go, and much more. For me, the fact is that the Russians recently adopted interceptor drones due to their mobile groups. That's why in Ukraine they have not yet recognized the threat of a system level and developed different ways to protect drone operators, or copy it from Russians. For example, since they faced a serious threat to their UAVs and accordingly introduced countermeasures much earlier. Even though it didn't happen immediately, the same Shaheds flew for many months unaltered, and even in daylight. In short, there is room for improvement. As they say, I want to hope that this growing process will happen quickly from the Ukrainian side. This war is also an endless technological race for peace and countermeasures. Furthermore, even such incomplete drone use is enough to repeatedly cause significant damage to Russian facilities, including oil infrastructure. 3 drones hit the Yarova refinery in Kramatorsk district of Vladimirsk region on September 7, according to Astra's sources in the emergency services of the region. As a result, 2 tanks and 4 administrative buildings were damaged in the facility, and a long-range pump station was discharged after the attack. The satellite images also confirm the damage to 2 tanks, which was published by the Ukrainian channel Dnepropetrovsk, confirming the damage to no less than 2 tanks. Previously, I remind you about the attack on the Yarova refinery, the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Madyar, braved, about which we talked yesterday. Governor Alexander Avdiyev of the Volodymyr region in the morning of September 7 reported that UAVs were suppressed in the region, and there were no casualties. However, he did not specify the place of the strike. In the meantime, strikes on Russian oil do not stop. Governor Dmitry Hurovsky in the Rostov region reported a fire at an oil depot in the village of Pokrovsk as a result of the attack. According to him, the fire was completely eliminated, there are no casualties, the tanks were damaged. In addition to equipment for monitoring fire, fire trains were involved. Satellite servicing for monitoring NASA firms' fires showed a fire in Pokrovsk. Putin was likely in Sochi when the city was attacked by a drone, according to the agency. According to the agency, yesterday, Putin participated in a brief meeting in Sochi. A presidential board L-96-300PU arrived in the city, which is now held there, Flightradar 24 reports. In this very plane, Putin flew to Alaska for a meeting with Trump, the agency reports. Sochi is home to the Putin residency, Bakrov-Ruchi. However, after the drone attack on the city, he generally did not stay there for long. Officially, the authorities report a person's death as a result of the attack. In Sochi, he died when his car was hit by debris from a dropped UAV. About 6 private houses were also damaged. This reminds us of a remarkable episode of the beginning of the Second World War. In 1940, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov came to Berlin to negotiate with Hitler about the sphere of influence in Europe. Long-term reception at the Soviet embassy where Foreign Minister of the Third Reich Ahim von Ribbentrop was present was disrupted by a British aviation raid, which Ribbentrop suggested to Molotov to investigate in his bomb shelter, where he once again spoke of the soon collapse of the British Empire. And to those ahead of its inherited, Molotov held back his pieces and asked, if India is defeated, why are we sitting in this shelter, whose bombs are falling so close that they can be heard even here? Ribbentrop was embarrassed and silent. What a historical anecdote. But Putin will also have to wonder and remains silent if he is asked. If Ukraine is so close, why did he practically stop visiting the residency in Sochi and the building in Zelenjik, as well as slapping the area around the dozens of tanks? On the evening of September 8, a combined strike was carried out on Donetsk. Ukrainian sources reported that, judging by the debris, drones were used, including the Pekla missile and a turboreactive UAV, Klubnik. Yesterday, I called the landlady a bit of an outlier, making an original meme with Askabiva, but many of you still read the reference anyway. As they say, a saboteur to the sick imagination of Nazism, that word Klubnik sounds like a Ukrainian pillow, if you said it correctly or misrepresentatively. It's either a mistake on the knees or a bullet. Look what's happening in Kiev. The Pro-Asingarbu project has geolocated sites of hits. Attacks were carried out on the territory of the former Topaz plant, where there is a command point of the army level. The Donetsk metallurgy plant, where there was a command point of the 20th Motorized Rifle Division and the Research Institute Complex Automation, the location of the command point of the 41st Combined Arms Army. The Ukrainian ASIN project Ukrposhta added news and analysts that a Prague hotel in Donetsk was also attacked. The head of the DNR, Denis Pushilin, reported 2 killed and 16 injured personnel, but we're waiting for the log of everything, whose death Pushilin did not announce. Even if no large bodies were caught, the entire Russian grouping on the Pokrovsk direction and nearby areas still had problems, which is critically important given the prospect of a new Russian strike in this sector and the current actions of Ukraine's armed forces, which we'll talk about later. As to how seriously the Russian air defense was damaged, they say such desperate ways to replenish it are as attempts to revive an object long overdue to the production of the S-300 PS system. And by old good cannibalization, where of several units they form one that can be fixed. A new satellite image from Khabarovsk's radiotechnical plant reports a massive movement of military equipment, the Militarny reports. Syntanalytic 8 Niktoa notes that this is primarily due to the S-300 PS systems, which were long removed from production. Photos taken in 2 years show that a significant number of air defense systems were taken out of the plant. In particular, a movement of 6 universal moving towers, 40 V6 MDs, 330 N6 radars, 2 5 N66s, 13 P85 launchers, 4 mobile repair workshops, and 14 generators was recorded. At the same time, a more detailed analysis showed that radioactivity stations 30 and 6 were not completely removed, but moved inside the plant. The total number of such radars in the facility remains 13 units. Since 30 and 6 radars have not been produced for a long time, Moscow has been forced to use accumulated stockpiles. According to ATN Actu, these batteries are effectively parts reserves, not full combat units. According to the radio launcher, the test is likely to take place before return to service. Satellites show signs of activity indicating test operations. According to the report, Russian forces are trying to restore only 2 S-300 batteries out of 8 on site. So let's not be skeptical. The basis of Ukraine's S-300 fleet was exactly the PS modification, and it has handled its tasks well to protect Ukrainian skies even before Western systems arrived. Even an old S-300 is likely capable of knocking down the same flamingos, but only where that very S-300 is present, and constant strikes on Russian refineries likely creates even more holes in the Russian air defense, which should be blocked somehow. 2 S-300 batteries are, by the way, a rather substantial replenishment. We're talking 8 Wolf launchers, and a total of 29 S-300 and S-400 various changes were destroyed at sea during the fighting. Although that number may of course be more, considering that compromised are usually hit at a long distance from the front, and therefore objective control data is not always available. Against the ongoing strikes on the refinery, commanders continue to whine that Russia's capability of command is organized poorly. This time, a Nazi named Yevgeny Ryskazov, nicknamed Tapas, initiated a war in the ranks of Russian armed forces thanks to refinery commander Ivan Filipov. Here, what? Tapas writes, attacks at the refinery are a separate matter, whether in Donbass or in old Russia. It once happened that almost all of my friends are military elite, who once left assault and reconnaissance units and has strongly started mastering UAVs. Without exception, these people said that the security of the sky in our cities is held by passers-by who, at best, have graduated from the Academy of Defense, where they have not been taught anything related to modern UAV systems. These incompetent people were recruited by other incompetent people to prevent enemy attacks on our strategic objects, such as refineries and refinery operations. As a result, after receiving bags of money and a short, they pull cutters, leaving the whole area without communication, and the birds so fly. I have already heard about it, that Ukrainians bypass all systems and have nothing to stop them. No, guys, to stop the Ukrainians, you need to stop helping the Ukrainians, which helps them. Ukrainians with bureaucratic clarity and full personnel day when it comes to new calls. I am read by a huge number of military specialists, including from the field of UAV. They do not allow me to lie. There are not only effective measures against the UAV, we also have all the technical means needed for this. Only one company has become known, a company that has approached a number of strike UAV operators with the proposal to regularly attack their objects with empty drones, to take all the necessary both equipment and engineering security measures. But this is the Russian resident neo-Nazis. The publication inside tells about an interesting long-term effect of the Operation Spider. Then, I remind you, Ukrainian drones carried out a strike on airfields of Russian strategic aviation right from the territory of Russia. If you want to fresh up on your memory, this is, perhaps, the brightest operation of Ukrainian special services in the history of humanity. Then I have a video about it, recorded along the hot marks. So, as a way to prevent such spiderweb operations in the future, the Russian command carried out large-scale accordingly bombings of Tu-95M and Tu-160M. The main part of the flight ships were deployed from airfields in European parts of Russia, including a line in Murman Oblast almost 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine to the Far East, mainly at the Ukraine airfield in Amur Oblast, at a distance of about 8,000 kilometers from the combat zone. Trains Tu-160 were concentrated from the Bela airfield even further to the Anadar airfield in Chukotka and Yelizova in Kamchatka. The practice of regularly using the Ukrainian airfield for combat flights has been noted since June 2025. This airfield now serves as the main place of deployment of Tu-95MS aircraft. The problem is that the change in the structure and location of strategic aviation has not taken into account the corresponding characteristics in logistics and management of all processes. Airports as before are serviced, charged with missiles, have training flights, and are refueled at Engels 2 and Olnia airfields, where the appropriate capacity is located, in particular, the special oil base of the Rosreserva Crystal combination near Engels 2. After which they are returned back to the Deep East. The launch lines of missiles on Ukrainian territory have not changed. For the KH-101/55, this is mostly airspace over the territories of Saratov, Volgograd, Astrakhan, and Caspian Sea for the rarely used KH-22 and KH-32, the Black Sea waters. Thus, the combat cycle of aircraft in the KH-101 carrier, strategic bombers Tu-95 and Tu-160, now requires much more time and resources for flights, landings, and missile launches themselves. Ukrainian monitoring resources noted at least one attempt to conduct attacks directly from long-range bases of the White airfields. However, in this case it is necessary to refuel in the air to attract several refueling aircraft simultaneously, and too much cargo falls on the crew. Standard combat flight Tu-95MS of the Ukrainian airfield with intermediate landings, Vilna, or Engels 2, missile launches and return back, according to known estimates, now requires over 12,000 kilometers, which is equivalent to 23 hours of stay in the air. The operation of Tu-95MS and Tu-160 in this regime obviously leads to an accelerated exhaustion of the flight resource and an increase in the cost of launches of missiles on Ukraine. It is important that both types of planes are not produced since the beginning of the 90s. The release of the new Tu-160 is currently carried out from the Soviet project, i.e., these are initially old-fashioned vehicles. For example, NK-12MP engines installed on Tu-95MS are assumed to have a total service resource of 5,000 flight hours and no more than 200 flight hours per year for the plane in general. In this case, if the flight hours are 23 hours instead of 4-5 hours before departure, the annual resource would be a total of 8-9 flights. The capital repair of one Tu-95MS refinery is estimated at $50 million. The exact cost of a Tu-95MS flight and a Tu-160 is honestly unknown, but according to the year-end estimates, this ratio is over $20,000 for the Tu-160, and without combat use of missiles. Even if we assume that the costs have remained the same, expenditures were supposed to increase from $80,000 to almost $500,000 for the flight. It's possible that the new order of organization of strategic strike operations on Ukraine is already causing technical problems. Well-known cyber channel DOSISHBON claims that during the night strike on September 3, 2025, one of the Tu-160 didn't complete launch of the missile due to the exit of the launching mechanism, and the other side couldn't leave the Engels 2 airfield. Well, of course, when they have to plan these operations long-term to get them to Engels 2. Let's say the leak of this information can suddenly lead to the visit of this airfield, also known as the Engels missile, which can destroy these sides. In short, the spiderweb not only was the most amazing operation we have ever seen in the history of such operations, but also has a quite serious effect, which just increases. Ukrainian military analyst Konstantin Mashavets probably provides the situation in the so-called Dobrapilya direction in the most detailed way. It is about the advance to the point of the so-called breakthrough on the Dobrapilya road, the Dobrapilya-Pokrovsk highway, and the vicinity. It is about the advance to the point of the so-called breakthrough on the Dobrapilya road, the Dobrapilya-Pokrovsk highway, and the vicinity. It is about the advance to the point of the so-called breakthrough on the Dobrapilya road, the Dobrapilya-Pokrovsk road, and the vicinity. This time here it's about the difficult situation of the Russian 51st Army, in which its own command tore it up. Command of the Russian 51st Combined Arms Army, writes Mashavets, the former 1st Army Corps of the People's Militia of the DPR, is doing very, very strange. For example, he writes, "It does not surprise me if the offensive of this army will soon turn into its defeat. It continues to try to deliberately break through in previous sectors, without taking into account any consequences of change in the operational tactical situation in its own line of offense. Prior to that, preamstvo is worthy of respected fascination. To remind you, Moshevitz previously wrote that the command of the 51st Army is trying to simultaneously revive the notorious breakthrough and open a route to Pokrovsk. At the same time, apparently despite Ukrainian counterattacks, in particular in the area of Novotororetsk and Koptiv, where Ukrainian defense forces are trying to cut off already large Dobropoli salient. That is, not only the area captured during the breakthrough attempt, but also quite an extensive territory south of it, summarized by strikes on Novotororetsk and Rizino. Apparently, Moshevitz means that the 51st Army continues to ignore this threat and advance in certain directions, so almost all the army risks being in the encirclement. The other thing is that the Ukrainian defense forces are doing a race against time here. The decisive Russian offensive, the preparation and prospects of which are about to begin in the vicinity. So far, the situation for the Russian troops in this direction is really not going better than expected. In the 1st Azov National Guard Corps, they are showing another batch of Russian prisoners, accompanied by a video in the following comment. In the video, there is a group of Russian prisoners of war who were captured in the field of responsibility of the 1st Azov Corps. The pursuit of successes, so to speak, was sent the occupiers to the hottest point of Donetsk Dobropoli. The Russian armed forces failed the defense forces stabilize the situation, and these soldiers were simply lucky to survive. The prisoners were held by the troops of the 4th Operational Brigade of the NGU Rubezh and the 82nd Separate Assault Brigade of Bukovinsk. We remind citizens of Russia who are part of the Russian armed forces and who came to Ukraine armed with weapons in their hands. Giving up is the only chance to survive. For a month of active combat operations in the Dobropolya direction, where the unit of the 1st Azov Corps of the NGO, together with its neighboring units, is holding a defensive line, 69 occupiers were captured. And that is not the end they promise in Azov, and I would believe their promises. In the Lyman direction, the situation for the Ukrainian defense forces continues to deteriorate. Remember, according to recent reports from the agency, almost 2/3 of the territory occupied by the Russians last week had come here. Deep State provides details about the situation in the direction, especially in the Serebrianske forestry, which is becoming worse and worse. Russian armed forces are not stopping their pressure on the positions of Ukrainian soldiers, analysts write, and are trying to completely push the Ukrainian defense forces out of the forest, using the previous success which they are allowing to develop. The most difficult situation is in the eastern part of the forestry between Grigorovka and Serebrianske, where the Russians are already trying to secure themselves to control this territory. An additional obstacle is the Baltistaya Mestness, which complicate these processes for Russian armed forces. Also, the Russians are trying to cut the way into the forest near Dronovka, and unfortunately they have almost managed it. Periodically, they report near the Yelzerchny road, which becomes an alarm signal for Ukrainian defense positions, because it poses a threat to positions that do not expect Russian infantry to appear, complicating the entire process of targeting the area as well as complicating logistics to positions. Pressure doesn't stop in the Serebrianske area, where Russian armed forces occasionally send even vehicles for assault operations. Today, in other words, since September 9, several Russian infantry BMPs on motorcycles drove on the assault direction of the village, and before that, a column of several units moved. At the same time, constant infantry pressure flows through positions and accumulates in the rear. A difficult situation remains in Rzeszów, where infantry without stop in the Russian armed forces is infiltrating into the village, trying to survive, secure themselves, and taking control of the settlement. Russians are often fixed in different parts of the village just as they are hit. Defense forces make their best effort not to let Russian forces completely occupy the settlement, so they often clean up the strikes with drones, reports Deep State. Let me remind you, the operational goal of all these actions is for the Russians to reach Severodvinsk and Slavyansk from the north, locating the Slavyansk-Kostiantynivka agglomeration in Tisk. These tasks are still far from being achieved. A Russian attack in the city of Chasiv Yar continues, which, I remind you, the Russian Ministry of Defense took as much as a loan on July 30, that is, already 6 weeks ago. Deep State publishes footage of a strike in the unit of the 3rd Battalion of Guard of the 101st Separate Brigade and the Guard of the General Staff on Russian infantry in the city, and writes the following. Russians leave no attempts to enter the city of Chasiv Yar, especially in the Novosvernaya microdistrict, which they have not been able to take under control. Chasiv Yar is one of the directions toward Kostiantynivka, which the Russian armed forces aim to occupy, but Ukrainian defense forces are making 0 attempts. Photos also demonstrate the nature of the fighting in this area, and in many others, when Russian infantry, for several people or even for one, are hiding in tree lines, forests, or ruins in order to accumulate, get close to the positions of Ukrainian fighters, and secure themselves in the area. The pilots need to make an effort to find Russian soldiers, but when this happens, the life of Moscow degenerates ends there, authors of the project ensure. The channel Mobilization reports that it forces Russian troops to die under Ukrainian drones. We were sent another video with torture on the front, writes the channel. Today, Putin introduced the State Department with a bill denouncing the European Council Convention on the warning of torture, while in the meantime, the armed forces have staffed some kind of middle age, the channel authors comment. The only thing I disagree with is that they embarked now. No, they embarked a long time ago, and that's not a buggo featuring. In fact, the Russian army literally scares its own soldiers, treats them badly, torture them, humiliates them, spits at them, sometimes even beep them. This is to ensure they have protection to go into a mortal attack and die there. This is a regularly and deliberate practice in the Russian army, so stay far away from it if you do. Join the Russian army no matter, even if you're a coward who wants to destroy Ukraine, supports Putin, and so on. There's no place for you in the Russian army. They'll beep you, beat you, and tape you to a tree just like the soldiers you've just seen, because most likely these money won't go to the soldiers but to those who are raising the funds to the people, and they will spend it on a car and apartment and all that. What good are we to you? In the sense that it is the Z-mining that robbers as much money as possible because it weakens the Russian army. But why am I saying all this? You probably understand, because I wrote a lot to people yesterday, as they know it is my favorite topic, and of course it was absolutely humiliating. Z-blogger Roman Alyakina, remember this? This is so a big fan of Clausewitz and Sun Z. So a very pompous fool who loved to write, as Clausewitz said, you don't understand political technology, and so on. Well, and a complete degenerate who was an aide to the governor of the Kursk region who was shoved out of it. Then he went to Akhmatoy and he was shoved out of it too. Well, he's actually a fool. A person is a fool and a theft, obviously. There was a story when he bought Zikers for 6 million, which they paid for, and he started saying, I'm a businessman, that's for sure. And it's known that before the full-scale war began, he and his mother lived together, and it's not bad, but he isn't described as someone who can afford to live alone, and who hasn't lived in a small apartment. But as the war began, and as he began to raise money for the Russian army, he could somehow leave and buy a fairly expensive Zikir for himself, the cost of which is 5-6 million. So yes, such an interesting character. In short, he is suspected of extortion of money when buying humanitarian aid for the use of the SVO, as pro-government channels say. The channel's Telegram published a video on which Alyakin talks to a certain businessman. According to the scheme shown in the video, the enterprise transferred 200 million rubles to Alyakin's fundraising fund, after which he purchased medicine from the same businessman for a front of 150 million rubles, returned part of the money to the businessman, and Alyakin received a commission of 50 million rubles. Retained an assistant's reputation, this is what he said himself, while Alyakin will provide less medicine than was announced. Roman Alyakin himself didn't comment on the video at first, and then he says, you didn't understand, it's a scheme to buy medicine, then find 50 million and buy something else. Why? If a businessman wants to give a Russian army of medicines for 150 million rubles, because this is exactly a purchase for that businessman, he's not a real businessman, he's more of an operator who carried out the operation. Anyway, let's say this businessman wants to transfer 150 million rubles to Alyakin. Why would he need to transfer money to Alyakin? So he can transfer the money back to the same medicaments. Meaning, immediately give the medicaments 150 million rubles. This can't be used for anything else but basically, well, just null the money. Well, he probably didn't fool around, he probably got away from the tariffs one way or another, which I don't understand. In short, the scheme is right there. Naturally, the whole Z-telegram was blown over. That's Alyakin, who is known for actively raising funds for the troops, and later, according to Z-Public, just bought himself a machine and all that. Everyone started indicating him, saying he's about to lose trust in the Z-experts. That's how it goes. By the way, let me remind you, Alyakin is a full governor of the Akhmat unit, including the Akhmat special team, and he has a big battle with Solovyov. Why the video about Alyakin did not air yesterday, for example, and it will today, I hope, is because I'm waiting for Solovyov's reaction. I think it will go well. There are many reaction videos, and of course, we'll get acquainted with them all. Honestly, if not for the Polish raid, the bloody fight with Russian troops in Yarova, I would tell you this story at the very beginning of the report, since this is apparently the main drama, Z-telegrama, in time, perhaps Gudvin in earnest. Of course, a stormy reaction of the colleagues, very painful, and one extremely different, and I will introduce you to this. So far, another confirmation has appeared that the donate for the emergency fundraising of Z volunteers is being carried out only to support these very volunteers. And first of all, thank you very much to the Z volunteers who spend this money not on the Russian army but on their own well-being. And secondly, of course, this whole story must be exposed as much as possible, because a general decrease in donations to the Russian army reduces its possibility. And of course, this story will hit all the Z volunteers urgently, and I hope it will strike in a so-called turn-based. At night of September 7, at a block post in one of the settlements of the occupied part of the Zaporizhia region, a light vehicle called Lada Vesta was stopped close to the city of Vasilivka to check documents that were confiscated by two servicemen. As the Public Ossetia reports, when they tried to check transport and documents, they attacked the block post workers trying to take their weapons away. After an unsuccessful attempt, they tried to hide and hit the military police, but they opened a fire on wheels and then on the car. The car was found 2 kilometers from the scene. As it turned out later, 2 soldiers from the 429th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 19th Motorized Rifle Division of the 58th Southern Military District were in the car. 35-year-old George Bekuzarov from the village of Trau, North Ossetia, and 30-year-old Arthur Fatikov from the north of the Ossetian city of Dihora. Astra verified their personality. According to Astra, Yefreiter Bekuzarov has been in Sochi for more than 3 months. Bekuzarov was injured. Fatikov died at the scene of the incident. I would like to note the fundamental difference between the voluntary leave of a unit in the Ukrainian Defense Forces and Russian Armed Forces, which few people talk about. In Ukraine, the absolute majority of those who left their parts voluntarily did not even fight, said, for example, the Ukrainian People's Deputy from the Volos section, member of the TVR Question National Security, Defense and Intelligence, Serge Rachmanin, in an interview radio NV gave a quote. The absolute majority of those who go to the ZCH, especially in the last years, are not those who leave the combat positions, not those who served a year or 2, 2.5 or 3. The absolute majority go to the ZCH along the road to the training center, directly from the training center on the road from the training center, to the place of appointment on the location of their brigade or at the first hour or days of their service in the combat brigade. That is, in Ukraine, those who, in principle, have never wanted to be there, they want to return to normal life as much as possible under criminal charges, and during the war at the same time, Russian sources go to the army voluntarily. They run only when they have managed to face the real war in the service of Russian armed forces, which of course seriously impacts their psychology. In addition, they manage to get a little skill in dealing with weapons or even feel a taste of blood, so it is potentially more dangerous for the army and society for Russian soldiers. Let's remember again the recent story of Alexei Chomchenko, who raped and killed the 9-year-old Katia Demidova in Podonsk. Even if the number of such people in Russia is relatively lower, although there has been a sharp rise of deserters recently, they still potentially represent a much bigger problem for Russia than for Ukraine's deserters. As I've said yesterday, the number of Russian deserters has simply double and triple growing, a fairly serious increase. And as you may have seen, I haven't go through the news separately in each video. Maybe we'll discuss it in another video. In the Kremlin, they understand the danger of returning Russian troops back to Russia, and they don't want this to happen. On the question of how long Putin is still willing to continue the war, all of his options are bad, but we'll talk about that with you again someday. After all, VODAC format is a story where we talk more about the specific information that's been going on in recent years. So let's keep watching. We're discussing 24 hours a day. Thank you very much for watching, for supporting, and once again, sorry for the campaign conditions, but again, I think you should rather listen to these episodes where it doesn't matter what the picture looks like. This was Michael Nacke with you, and until next time, all the best, goodbye.